we're going to take a look at some review questions for exam 3. From the exam review, we're only going to look at the questions that will be similar to the ones that you will have on your next test. If you were not in class to get this review and you want a copy of it, you need to email me. It's not something that I automatically send out. So we're going to look at two parts from question 1. 1B says 14 less than twice a number. Remember that when you have less than, you need to be able to subtract from something. And so we're taking 14 away from whatever comes after it in the words. And so twice a number or 2 times a number, and let's use n for our unknown number, goes first. So 14 less than twice a number translates to 2n minus 14. So for our next one, we have 12 divided by, so 12 will become the top of our fraction, because remember we use our fraction bar to show the division. And then what are we dividing by? We're dividing by the sum. That means that whatever we have on the bottom is going to be added together. And then what is that on the bottom? We have a number and 4. Remember, the word and refers to whatever operator was mentioned previous, which is sum. And so we'll have our number n plus 4 on the bottom. Okay, we're going to skip to number 3 next. And here we need to get rid of parentheses first. Remember, parentheses comes before subtraction, so we cannot do 3 minus 6 at first. We have to use -6 and distribute it in through the parentheses. So the 3 just gets brought down, and then -6 times -7y will become a positive 42y. So we'll put plus 42y. And then -6 times -4 is a positive 24. Remember, I always circle that negative with a 6 so I don't forget to use it through both parts. And then if we look at the right-hand side, this equal sign, there's nothing outside of it to distribute. And so we can just ignore those and write it without them. So -4y plus 8 minus 7. Okay, let's simplify by combining like terms on either side. We have 2 constants, 3 and 24, that get added together on the left. So we have 27 plus 42y equals, and then we have 8 minus 7 over here to get 1, so -4y plus 1. Now let's move all of our y's to the left and all our constants to the right. So we need to add 4y to both sides. So all our y's are on the right-hand side, or sorry, on the left-hand side. So that'll zero out my y's there. So let's go ahead and show that we're subtracting 27 from both sides in the same step. So that way the constants are being zeroed out on the left. And when we do this, we'll get 42y plus 4y will give us 46y. And then 1 minus 27 will give us -26. And so what we need to do now is to divide both sides by 46. And then simplify the fraction on the right. And so -26 over 46 reduces down to -13 over 23. So that is our answer. Let's look at number 5 next. Here we have a problem where we need to distribute, just like the last one, but this time we have to distribute on both sides. And so let's go ahead and multiply the 2 throughout the parentheses, and that gives us 2x plus 8. And then on the right, don't forget that negative goes with a 6, and that goes through the parentheses. That'll give us -48 minus 18x, and we have plus 20x. There's nothing that we can do to simplify on the left, so we'll leave it as 2x plus 8. On the right, let's combine like terms. So we have our negative 48 that drops, but negative 18x plus 20x will give us plus 2x. And hopefully you see that 2x plus 8 cannot be the same as 2x plus negative 48. And so let's show that we have a no solution by trying to subtract 2x from both sides. Because what we would want to do is move them all to one side, but what happens is they zero out on either side, and we're left with 8 equals negative 48, which is not true, so we have a no solution. And again, you can show no solution with the empty set or with the words no solution. We're going to jump to number 9 next. Here we have one with fractions. So in order to do this problem, you can either work as it is and distribute your 1/2, distribute your negative 1/3, and work with fractions. That is fine. Your calculator can help you with the fractions. Or you can see what you need to multiply to get rid of fractions. And so if we multiply everything by 2 times 3 or 6, then we will get rid of all of our fractions. But remember, everything has to be multiplied by 6. And also that when you have something that's to be distributed, you only multiply that by 6 one time because that's all stuck together. So if you multiply the 1/2 by 6, it gets distributed in through the parentheses. If you multiply what's inside of parentheses and what's outside of parentheses, both by 6, it's like multiplying that part by 36, which will throw things off because the left side isn't multiplied by 36. So let's go ahead and multiply everything by 6. First, I'm just going to recopy my problem and leave some room to be able to get to my times 6 in there. And then I'm going to show that everything is multiplied by 6. Okay, so now let's start simplifying. 6 times 3 is 18. And we have minus 6 times x, or 6x, equals 6 times 1/2 is 3. So now we have 3 to distribute for our first parentheses. And we're subtracting 6 times 1/3, which is 2. So 2 gets distributed, well, negative 2 technically, in our second parenthesis. So now we're ready to do that now. So again, we have a negative that we can't forget to distribute. We'll drop down our 18 and minus 6x on the left. And that equals 9 minus 3x minus 4x plus 6. And now we're ready to combine like terms on the right. So 18 minus 6x will get brought down. And we have 9 plus 6 for our constant of 15, and negative 3x minus 4 more x, that gives us negative 7x. And so now let's go ahead and move all our x's to the left. So we're going to add 7x to both sides. And so now we'll want to move the 18 to the right. So we'll subtract 18 from both sides. And see what we have when we are done simplifying. And so negative 6 plus 7 is 1x. The 1 can stay disappeared. We don't need to put a coefficient of 1. And then 15 minus 18 is negative 3. So our solution to the problem is x equals negative 3. Let's look at number 11 next. Translate and solve. 87 times the difference between a number and 8 is equal to the number plus negative 42. Find the number. So 87 is being multiplied by the difference. And so to show that we're multiplying a subtraction, we'll put parentheses around that. And so again, we'll have the difference or subtract. And what we're subtracting is a number, and remember, and refers to difference. 8, so our n or x or whatever variable you choose to use, and 8 is equal to the number plus a negative 42. So let's start cleaning this up a little bit by distributing our 87. And so we're going to have 87n minus 696. And on the right, we can just change our adding a negative to subtracting. So that way we're not using two signs. So our next step will be to get our n's. And again, there's that invisible 1 there, so I'm going to show it so I don't forget to subtract 1 on the left. And so that means we're adding 696 to both sides. And when we simplify that, we get 86n equals 654. And then we divide both sides by 86. And this one doesn't divide out evenly, so you can either write it as a reduced fraction, or I'm going to round it 1 decimal place. And so n equals 7.6. It didn't say in the directions what to do. So again, leaving it as a fraction or rounding it 1 or 2 decimal places is fine. Okay, we're going to skip ahead and look at number 17 next. Our equation where we're solving for a variable. In this case, we're solving for f. We've done this one before. So if you remember, first we need to be able to separate the f from the minus 32. And in order that, we have to get rid of parentheses. In order to get parentheses gone, we need to get rid of our 5/9. It's being multiplied. So we can get rid of it by dividing it off, which is the same as flipping a fraction and multiplying by its reciprocal. Now, if you want to distribute the 5/9 throughout your parenthesis, you can do that as well, but I think it just is more work. So I like to do it the most simplest way, if that's even a word, possible. So if I think of my divide by 9 as multiply by 9 and multiply by 5, divide by 5, that helps me think of that reciprocal, which means 9/5 has to go to the other side as well. And so those will cancel, and I'm left with 9/5 times C equals my Fahrenheit minus 32. So since I got rid of what's on the outside of my parentheses, I don't need them anymore. So now the only thing to do to get f by itself is to get rid of the subtracting 32 by adding 32 to both sides. And notice on the left, they are not like terms, so we can't add them together. We can just stick them next to each other. So we'll have our 9/5 times our C plus 32 is the formula now to get Fahrenheit degrees from Celsius degrees. Let's look at number 18 next. Sarah has 4 exam scores, 82, 91, 85, and 78. What score does she need on her 5th exam to have a mean or an average grade of 80? So again, if we think of what it means to get the mean or get the average, we're adding up all the scores. So 82 plus 91 plus 85 plus 78 plus the 5th exam. Let's just use E for exam. And all of that divided by how many there are, which are 5 total. And that needs to make an average of 80. So our unknown is inside as a score, not the average. So let's clean it up first by adding everything together that we have on top so far. So we have 336 plus whatever final exam score divided by 5 equals 80. Again, that's 336 and E are stuck together until we get rid of our denominator, which is a divide by. So let's multiply both sides by 5 so we can get rid of that. And when we do that, we will get 336 plus E equals 400. And so then our final step is just to subtract that 336 from both sides. And that will leave us with what she needs for her exam. So our E equals 64. She can get a 64 on the final, I'm assuming it's in percents. And she will still have an 80 for the class. Let's look at number 19 next. This problem in your test will give you a chart. I'm not sure why they didn't for number 19 here. But Andrew invests $35,000 for a year in a bond fund that pays 5% interest and a stock fund that pays 12% interest. The total yearly interest was $3,150. How much was invested in each? So if we picture our chart, yes, it's beautiful, isn't it? We have our stock fund, and we have our, they list bond fund first. So let's put that first so we can keep the numbers straight and not stick them accidentally in the wrong column. Remember, they are giving us the percent interest, so that was in the middle column. So we have the bond fund is 5%, so 0.05. And the stock fund is 12% interest, so 0.12. They don't give us dollar amount. And so the book was using P. We'll say that our P value is what's invested in the bond fund. So the stock is the total invested, 35,000, minus that amount, so minus P. And then the last column is just those two multiplied together. So 0.05 P and 0.12 times our 35,000 minus P. And it says the total was 31,500. So when we add those two numbers together, we should get 3,150. And so that's where our equation comes from. And so I'll type this because I'm writing very sloppy. We have 0.05 P plus 0.12 times the difference of 35,000 minus P. And that gives us our total interest of 3150. So our next step would be to distribute our 12. Here we go. And so we still have 0.05P. And then we're adding 0.12 times 3,500 gives us 4,200. And then 12 times negative P will be minus 0.12P. And that equals 3150. Okay, now we're going to combine like terms on the left. So 0.05 minus 0.12 will give us negative 0.07. And we're still adding the 4,200 to equal 3,150. And so the next thing we need to do is to move our constant to the right, since all our variables, all our p's are on the left already, so minus 4,200. And that leaves us negative 0.07p equals the negative 1,050, so 1050. And so then we'll divide the negative 0.07 from both sides. And that will leave us the amount, P, that's invested of $15,000. And remember, our P was representing our bond fund. So let's say that it's our at 5%. And so the total is 35,000. 35,000 minus 15 will leave us 20,000 for our 12% fund. Okay, let's look at one that we have to use a chart for as well with number 21. The Smiths are moving across the country. Mr. Smith leaves 3 hours before Mrs. Smith. If he averages 55 and she averages 65, how long will it take Mrs. Smith to overtake Mr. Smith? So this time it tells us let the variable t represent the amount of time that Mr. Smith has driven. And Mrs. Smith, it says that Mr. Smith leaves 3 hours before, so she leaves 3 hours later. So we have to do t minus 3 for her. The rate is 55 for Mr. Smith and 65 for Mrs. Smith. So the total distance for Mr. Smith is 55 times t, and Mrs. Smith is 65 times t minus 3. Okay, so that's our first step. When Mrs. Smith catches up, they will have traveled the same distance, so it's telling us to set them equal to each other. So we will have 55t equals 65 times t minus 3. So now we're supposed to solve the equation. So the first thing that we'll do is to distribute on the right. So we'll keep our 55t, and that equals 65t minus 195. So let's subtract 65t from both sides. And that will leave us with negative 10t equals negative 195. And then if we divide by negative 10, we see that the total trip t for Mr. Smith is 19.5. And so that was 19.5 hours. Usually we don't write 0.5. At least I don't for hours, so let's write it that way. So that's Mr. Smith. But notice the question asks how long will it take Mrs. Smith? So we have 19.5 minus 3 for Mrs. Smith. So it takes her 16.5 hours of driving. So then if they're moving at a distance of 1,100 miles will she pass before they arrive? Well, let's see how long it'll take for her to arrive. So we have, remember that we can find that if we solve our distance equals rate times time formula, which we've done before, we can see that the time that it takes her for the entire trip is the 1,100 miles divided by her speed, which is 65 miles per hour. And it is 16.9, I'll leave that one in the decimal hours. So that's her total trip time. And notice it's a little bit longer than the time it'll take her to catch up. So she will be traveling almost a half an hour longer, faster. So yes, she will get there first. Let's look at number 22 next. Now we're moving into more of the graphing. We have our equation in standard form of negative 2x plus 5y equals 15, and we have to create some ordered pairs. And the first one they're having us do is when the x value is negative 3. So we'll plug that in for our x and solve. So negative 2 times negative 3 plus 5y equals 15. So that'll give us 6 plus 5y equals 15. And we subtract 6 from both sides. We're left with 5y equals 9. And then our final step is to divide by 5. And let's just leave it as an improper fraction of 9/5. Don't forget to reduce if possible, but this one can't be. For our second one, we're plugging in y value of 1. So let's do negative 2x plus 5 times 1 equals 15. So we'll simplify it to negative 2x plus 5 equals 15. And so we'll subtract 5 from both sides, and that'll leave us negative 2x equals 10. And when we divide both sides by negative 2, we get negative 5 for our x. So negative 5, 1 is an ordered pair that satisfies that equation. Now we're going to look at our intercepts with x equals 0 for the y-intercept and y equals 0 for the x-intercept. So if we plug in 0 for x, we'll have negative 2 times 0 plus 5y equals 15. And anything times 0 is 0, and anything adding by 0 stays the same. So I'll just cross that off and see that 5y has to equal 15. So if we divide by 5, we see that the y value has to equal 3. So 0, 3. So now let's do the same for our y equals 0. So we have negative 2x plus 5 times 0 equals 15. And again, anything times 0 is 0, and that just kind of drops off there. So when we divide by negative 2, we see that our x equals negative 15 halves, or you can write it as negative 7.5 or 7 1/2. I'll leave it as an improper fraction again. And so lastly, we're plugging in x equals 5. And so we will have negative 2 times 5 plus 5y equals 15. Negative 2 times 5 is negative 10. So negative 10 plus 5y equals 15. And we'll add 10 to both sides to give us 5y equals 25. And then when we divide both sides by 5, we'll get y equals 5. So 5, 5 is an ordered pair for this equation. We're going to look at number 24 next. Given y equals 1/4 x minus 6, find the slope, y-intercept, and graph the line. And so they're already given us the equation in slope-intercept form. So our slope of the line is the 1/4. And our y-intercept is, can't forget the sign, -6, or as an ordered pair. Remember that's 0 for x, -6 for y. And so to graph the line, we'll start at that -6 down here. And the slope is positive 1/4, which means we're counting up 1 and over 4. And putting another point. I'm going to do it one more time, just to help me graph it, give me something to shoot for. And we'll draw our line. And so then I'll put my arrowheads on there, and there's my line. Number 25, we're given an equation in standard form and asked for the x and y intercepts. And to graph the line, remember your intercepts are when the other value equals 0. So x-intercept is y equals 0. And y-intercept is when x equals 0. So it'll put it right on those lines. And so when we look at the x-intercept of y equals 0, remember we're zeroing out the y value, so that kind of disappears. So it's when 2x is equal to 7. And so when we divide both sides by 2, we're going to see that x equals 7/2, which is 3.5. So let's count over 1, 2, 3, and go halfway more. So there's our x-intercept there. And when we have x equals 0, remember that it'll 0 out here. And so we'll be left with 7, y equals 7. And then when we divide both sides by 7, we're going to get y equals 1. So 0 up 1 is our y-intercept. And so we can connect those two. That's really bad. Let's see if I can move it a little. That actually looks better. Not so very cooking. But there is my equation graphed. The next question we're going to look at is number 26. So this time they give us a point. I know these points don't look like they're perfect, but they're supposed to be right there on those whole numbers. So the y-intercept is up 1. So it is 0, 1 as an ordered pair, or again, it is the b value of our equation. And our slope, if we go from the first point down to that point and count how many times we move to get there, we're going down 2 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So down to the -2 over 6. Our slope, our m value, would be -2/6, which reduces down to -1/3. And so our equation in slope-intercept form is y equals slope of -1/3, and the x, then the y-intercept of +1. We're going to skip several now and jump all the way to 36. Find the equation of the line passing through the points 4, 2, and 1, negative 4, and write your answer in slope-intercept form. And so for this one, we're going to first find the slope. M equals our change in y. Let's do negative 4 first, so negative 4 minus 2 over, we have to use a 1 first now, 1 minus 4. So negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6. 1 minus 4 is negative 3. So that gives us a slope of a positive 2. So now that we have the slope, we can use one of our points. Let's use 4, 2 as our point. And first write it in point slope form of the line and then simplify it down to solve for y to get it into slope intercept form of the line. So remember, this equation is y minus your y sub 1 equals slope parentheses x minus your x sub 1. So let's plug in those numbers and simplify. So y minus 2 from our ordered pair equals our slope of 2 parentheses x minus the x value of 4. So we need to first distribute our slope through. And so we'll get y minus 2 equals 2x minus 8. And so then our last step will be to add 2 to both sides. And so when we do that, we'll have y by itself. And we get 2x minus 6. So there's our equation in slope-intercept form. Let's look at number 38 next. Here we have an equation of a line, and we're asked to find the line that is perpendicular to that and passing through our point 1, 1. So first we have to remember that a perpendicular slope is a negative reciprocal. They have it in slope-intercept form, so we can just look there and see that the slope they gave us is negative 3/4. So we will flip it and make it positive. And so we have 4/3 as the slope we need to use. So again, let's use that point slope form of our line. So we'll have y minus the y value of 1 equals our slope, so 4/3, parentheses, x minus our x value, which is also 1. And then we'll simplify it. Again, it wants slope-intercept form, which means y equals mx plus b, so we solve for y. So just like before, we'll distribute our slope. So we'll have y minus 1 equals 4/3 x minus 4/3. And then we need to add 1 to both sides. And when we do that, we will get y equals 4/3 x. And negative 4/3 plus 1 is the same as negative 4/3 plus 3/3. So that'll leave us with a negative 1/3. So our equation in slope-intercept form is y equals 4/3 x minus 1/3. And now let's look at number 40. A textbook salesperson's monthly income depends on the amount of his sales. His monthly income is a salary of $420 plus 15% of his monthly sales. Write a linear equation for his monthly income of y for sales of x dollars. And so we have y equals, if we put it in order that we read this, it would be $400 plus the 15% of your x dollars, so 15% x or 0.15x. But let's write it in our slope-intercept form of the line, just because that's the pattern we're used to. So 15% would be 0.15 times whatever he sells, x, plus no matter what he sells, he still gets that $420. So if his monthly income was 555, so this isn't his sales, they're asking you to evaluate when Y equals $555. What was his monthly sales amount? So the $555 equals 15% of how much in sales plus the $420. So if we subtract the $420 from both sides, we get that $135 is what was extra in his paycheck from the sales. And again, with 15% commission. So we'll divide both sides by 0.15 to get that dollar amount. And it ends up being $900 in sales. Let's look at number 42 next. Ryan bought a new boat for $32,500 in the year 2004. He knows that the value of the boat has depreciated linearly. What is the y-intercept? Write your answers in ordered pair. So that is when it's new. So it's saying let 2004 be times 0. So that's new boat. 0 years have passed. And it cost $32,500. The value of the boat in 2008 was $21,500. Right, this is an ordered pair. So again, from 2004 to 2008 means 4 years have passed. So our X value is going to be 4, not 2008. And the boat was valued at $21,500. So our annual rate of change, we figure it out like we do our slope. And so we'll subtract our Y values. So let's do 32,500 minus the 21,500. So since we started with a 32,500 on the top, we have to put 0 on the bottom first. So 0 minus 4. So that leaves us with 11,000. Sorry. 11,000 over -4. Trying to confuse myself for a second there. Making sure that's right. And so if we divide 11,000 by -4, we get -$2,750 is how much it's depreciating per year. And again, it makes sense to have a negative because it's decreasing in value the older it gets. We're going to look at number 46 next. Do we have functions, yes or no? And so remember, for our function, we're looking at the x value to see if it repeats. So 4 and 8, 2 and 8. So since 8 repeats, we have 8 paired with 9 and then 8 paired with 11. So no, it can't be a function. We have 2, 5, 4, 9. And there's no repeaters there, so yes, it's a function. And then 2, 3, 4, 6. So yes, it's a function. For that one, they wanted to try and trick you, I guess, if you want to say that, because notice the 9 repeats and the 8 repeats. But that's okay. More than one x value can have the same y value, but we can't pair the same x value with a different y value. And you can see that on the graph too, because remember we're doing our vertical line test for a graph to check x values. And this one is a good graph for a function because there's no place where the x value is repeated, whereas E, if we even look at the y-intercept, we have 2 of them. So 0 is paired with 5 and with -5. And so, no, this is not a function. The next one we are going to look at is 47. So state the domain and range. Our domain is our x, our range is our y. Input and output is way you can think of it. So our domain, let's just list them in order. And remember, we use the braces to show lists. 3, -2, 0, 2, 4, -7. There was nothing that we had to skip due to repeats. And the range, let's look at that one. First one we have is 5, then -1, 3, -6, -2, and 8. We'll do another domain question with number 49. State the domain for these functions. Remember, domain has a restriction with the denominator not being able to equal 0, and then certain story problems might give us a restriction, but we don't have either case in here. So our domain can be anything. It's all real numbers, and so we can show that with a negative infinity to a positive infinity. For B, we do have a denominator that has x in it, so we know that x minus 3 is not allowed to equal 0. And so if we solve that, x is not allowed to equal 3. That's the only restriction we have. So we're going to show that by going from negative infinity and stopping at 3. Remember, the parenthesis here shows it's not allowed to equal 3. And we're combining that with picking up right after 3 and continuing on. So I think of that as like stepping over that 3. And the same for C. Here we have x plus 8 in the denominator. So x plus 8 cannot equal 0. So the only exclusion we have is x cannot equal -8. And so again, for our domain, we're going to show that by going from negative infinity to -8. And then that's a union, means combined symbol. Picking right back up after -8 and going on to positive infinity. One more for us to do together. Given a function 7x plus 1, we're going to evaluate f of 8 and f of 8 plus 5. So remember, the 8 is where the x is, and so we plug it in where the x is into the equation. So we're going to do 7 times 8, then plus 1. And 7 times 8 is 56, plus 1 more gives us 57. Here we have a plus 5. That is our replacement for our x. So 7x becomes 7 times a plus 5. And then plus 1 to finish out the function. Here we have to simplify, so let's distribute and make it 7a plus 35 plus 1. So our final answer says that our function evaluated at a plus 5 equals 7a plus 36. So if you have any questions as you're reviewing, please don't hesitate to send me an email. Otherwise, good luck on your exam, and I'll see you next time.